In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the pre-halving retrace phase of the 5 Bitcoin halving phases. We'll be talking about that because now we're seeing the pre-halving rally phase take place. What could things turn out to be around the halving itself? We could see a retrace at that time in a cycle. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward, and let's dive right into it. So the pre-halving rally, it's well underway. We've already concluded the pre-halving downside most recently, so we're now just going through the motions, transitioning from one phase to the other, and the next phase after this pre-halving rally is going to be the pre-halving retrace. So we'll be talking about that in a bit of detail. That still lies several weeks in the future, but if we focus on the previous cycles, in the past we've seen a lot of retracement around the halving event itself, and if the pre-halving rally tends to occur 60 days, 2 months before the halving event itself, approximately 2 to 4 weeks before the halving is when we see the pre-halving retrace. So let's focus on 2016 to talk more about this pre-halving retrace in a bit more detail. So we can see here, 60 days before the halving event itself, in 2016, we saw some dipping, but shortly afterwards, we saw a breakout to new highs. And then approximately 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks before the halving event is where Bitcoin experienced some downside. And that downside was quite significant because this was a pulling back of 40%. And the thing about that is that this is a downside wick. So of course, this is something that we can attribute to 2016, an earlier phase in the overall market cycle for Bitcoin. So this downside volatility might not be occurring in this cycle. So this is a 40% retrace, but even without that downside wick, this is 30% retracement, roughly speaking. So in a nutshell, 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks before the halving is when the 2016 pre-halving retrace occurred, and that retracement was 40% on the downside wicking, taking into account this extremity in price action, 40% deep or 30% deep, and really actually 29% deep to form a post-halving reaccumulation range. When we focus on 2020, on the other hand, we saw approximately 2 to 3 weeks before the halving topping out in Bitcoin's price action and then segueing into a 20% pre-halving retrace, which then saw consolidation in a post-halving reaccumulation range. So you can see across cycles already, when we local top before the halving, we then retrace for a few weeks actually. So while we retrace or at least local top a few weeks before the halving, this actual pre-halving retrace lasts a few weeks in total. So topping out before the halving, going into the halving, and even after the halving is where this retrace in general takes place. Same thing here. Just a few weeks before the halving is where we local top. Then the pullback goes into the halving, after the halving even, and then we consolidate to form a reaccumulation phase. So this really does teach us quite a lot in terms of where in the cycle should we be paying attention to the pre-halving rally ending, because we're currently seeing a pre-halving rally take place right now. We've only just begun it. So if we're to think about 4 to 3, 2 weeks before the halving for the pre-halving rally to local top, then it's around this portion, late March, maybe mid-March at the earliest, early April, where we could local top in this pre-halving rally before segueing into that pre-halving retrace. And if history is any indication, 20% on the shallower side, 30% on the more 2016 conservative side, and 40% in general on the truly extreme side, which is unlikely because what we've seen in this cycle is retraces of approximately 25% on each occasion. So this was a 25% retrace, roughly speaking, here quite similarly so, and 18% most recently. So very difficult to talk about a 40% retrace, just like we saw in 2016. But even then, that was a downside wick, which we might not be seeing such downside wicks any longer. You can actually see that this is a downside wick, which is very reminiscent of previous cycles. We still get a lot of volatility towards the upside, but maybe not to the extent and frequency that we see in earlier cycles. So this sort of downside wick maybe is a thing of the past, but nonetheless, even if you look at 2020, of course, this was a black swan event, pandemic and whatnot. So on very volatile moments in the market cycle, we can still see long downside wicks. Even here, you can just see that these downside wicks in this cycle are a little bit less frequent than what we saw in 2016, for example. So 20 to 30% retracement is something that we've seen already in the cycle on a few occasions. So maybe 20 to 30% at most is something that we should be potentially aware of occurring in the future, because a pre-halving retrace is going to occur after this pre-halving rally. Now that we've transitioned into this pre-halving rally, we have to look at where could we potentially top out before the halving, because this is where people are buying in anticipation of making a few dollars on the halving hype, and then they sell the rumor, they sell the news essentially, and then it's after the halving, many months after the halving, where we actually see price appreciate considerably as a result of the halving. This is a supply shock to the system, to the protocol itself. So buying a few weeks beforehand and then selling around the halving, that's typically what tends to happen, as you'll see from 2020, 2016. People buy in anticipation of profit potential and then sell just before the halving. That occurs across cycles, but the thing to really note is that it's after the halving where we tend to see parabolic rallying towards the upside. So selling just to make a quick buck on this move or even this move is quite short-sighted in the perspective of the grander parabolic rally that comes several months after the halving. So this pre-halving retrace is caused to a great extent by the traders who want to play this move and profit off this move. And of course, the sell side price action that occurs, this is where the so-called weak hands tend to sell and capitulate, afraid of seeing new lows. But this volatility around the pre-halving retrace is a shakeout moment, much like it's a shakeout moment during the post-halving reaccumulation period, where it's going to be more focused on boredom, because when we see sideways price action in the post-halving reaccumulation period, it's a lot of sideways action that's boring. We lack patience. We think that we'll make more money on an altcoin somewhere else, so we sell our Bitcoin and buy that altcoin. But then when Bitcoin actually explodes towards the upside, that altcoin loses its value in the very early stages of that parabolic rally from Bitcoin, but then money flows into that altcoin. But generally speaking, it's boredom and impatience that shakes people out in the post-halving reaccumulation period. And around the pre-halving retrace period, well, this is very simple. We tend to see simple fear and doubt and uncertainty creep into the minds of investors as they panic sell and capitulate around this pre-halving retrace, thinking that the halving hype was already priced in. It's always the same narrative across cycles, whether it's this cycle, 2020, or even 2016. There's always talk about the narrative of the halving being priced in, and this is why when we see price depreciate and see a retracement, loads of people are afraid that the bull market is over, the halving was priced in, and that we won't recover. But the reality is that we do recover, and it's really important to make the most of this pre-halving retrace as a opportunity, and one of the last opportunities, if not the final opportunity, for buying Bitcoin at a discount on a bargain price. The pre-halving retrace is that last opportunity to make the most of a final great retracement buy side opportunity for Bitcoin in the pre-halving period. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoyed this one, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak to you soon.